Hello, Oak Hill College. Greetings from Singapore. I am here this week. I wanted to record this message for your mission conference. I will join you in person by Zoom, and I wanted to record a message because I couldn't be there in person. And thanks to Dr. Chris Halls, and thank you for his friendship and his leadership, and for this mission conference titled Motus Day. And so I titled my talk as Motus Day, People on the Move and God on the Move. And I want to give you a little bit of personal background and help you to understand where I'm coming from. My roots goes back to India, and my parents are from the St. Thomas Christian heritage, and I have lived in many different parts of India and outside, and then went back to India, studied engineering and business, and pursued a career in technology based out of California, and was stationed briefly in Hong Kong and Singapore, and over a 10-year career, and traveling across Asia and the Pacific. And after 10 years, I felt called to ministry and went to seminary, studied at two schools in the U.S., and then came to England to do my doctoral work. And the last 25 years or so, I've been in ministry, teaching, researching, and traveling, and working with churches and mission agencies and institutions, and currently serving on the leadership of the Lausanne Movement. And so I want to begin with a couple of graphic illustration, and then we will jump into and a quote, and then we'll jump into our topic. This was the map of the world. A century ago, in 1922 or so, it was claimed that the sun never sets on the British Empire. The red regions are British colonial territories, and the largest of that was in India. And now, some 103 years later, we say sun never sets on the Indian diaspora. Some 60 million of Indians are living in over 190 countries. More Indians speak English than England, Ireland, Canada, United States, and Australia combined. In the last British Prime Minister was of Indian origin. So were the heads of states in Ireland, Portugal, and half a dozen of British colonies. There was a joke floating around and on social media. When the British Prime Minister was of Indian origin, the Scottish referendum seeking independence was a person of Pakistani origin. British divided India and Pakistan at the partition in 1947, and now the sons of India and Pakistan is trying to divide a united kingdom. There's a cardinal rule in migration studies. They are here because we were there. What goes around will come around. The nations that we trade with, war with, where our products are sold and exported to, where our currencies are floating around, where our media is consumed, and people who are impacted by our foreign policy will come to live near to us. All flows of goods, money, information, film, military, etc. will also create a counterflow of people inevitably. A quote, this comes from my mentor and Professor Andrew Walls. Perhaps the most striking single feature of Christianity today is the fact that the church now looks more like the great multitude that no one can number, drawn from all tribe, kindred, people, and tongue than ever before in history. Its diversity and history leads to a great variety of starting points for its theology and reflects varied bodies of experience. The study of Christianity and theology will increasingly need to operate from the position where most Christians are, and that will be increasingly the lands of and islands of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Pacific. The shared reading of Scripture and shared theological reflection will be the benefit of all, but the oxygen-starved Christianity of the West will have most to gain. He said this in 2018. He died a few years ago. He's no more. But it tells you the changing landscape of Christianity around the world. Human migration has become a defining issue of our times. More people are living in places other than where they were born than ever in human history. This is reshaping the world order as we know it. The societies, economies, nations, and around the world are no more the same as it was 25 years ago at the beginning of this millennia. But the current scale, the volume, the urge, and the speed of migration is truly unprecedented. Migration is extremely important to Christianity and its missionary calling. The diaspora factor has shaped and reshaped Christianity throughout its history and will continue to do so in the 21st century. So what is this word diaspora? It's an agrarian word that finds its origin in the Old Testament translation Septuagint, and it means a farming language. A farmer will take a handful of seeds, go out and then scatter them. And it has got many references in the New Testament referring to the dispersion of the Jewish people from the exile onwards. And in the early, when the Gospels were written, there was a large Jewish community all over the Roman Empire. And it also refers now to across many disciplines. And in the Lausanne circle, we use this descriptive phrase called people on the move. And the migrants and their descendants, and who traces their ancestry from people who are migrated to other places. And it has multiple origin, multiple routes, destination, under varying modes and conditions, and multiple generations. And it also includes people of mixed ancestry. And so this phenomena of dispersion of people and how that is an understanding of Scripture and the story of mission and story of Christianity in the 21st century, it is important to understand this term. Christianity has changed its face in recent decades. There's a radical reversal of the demographic and cultural composition of the church, and is often referred to as the shifting of the center of gravity of Christianity. It is more diverse and more dispersed and more global than it has ever been. Just a few months ago at Lausanne Congress in Korea, in Seoul, they had gathered Christians from every nation on the planet. There are only a few times this has ever happened. And the previous time it was in Cape Town, Congress in South Africa. And so there is a church in every country of the world. And also it is important for us to understand some of the larger Euro-American denomination and churches are all now in the global south. Some of the largest Lutheran community is in Ethiopia. The largest Methodist church is in Korea. There are more Anglicans in Nigeria than England, Scotland, Canada, America, and Australia combined. And who knows, as you are considering to elect the next Archbishop of Canterbury, there may be somebody from Nigeria or Africa who may be elected. And we recently saw this phenomena of the electing of the new Pope. The previous Pope was from Argentina. And in the last few years, if you've gone to Vatican, you hear so much more Spanish. Pope Francis, and he passed away recently. We have a new Pope who's from Chicago, who was born in Chicago. So lots of excitement in Chicago. But he's more of a Peruvian and a Latin American, and who is now heading the Catholic Church. And so we see the South Americans are leading the Catholic community. A World Council of Churches is headed by a South African, a Presbyterian, and who's of Indian origin, a fourth-generation Indian in South Africa. And then we see the Lausanne is headed by an Asian, a Korean. And so we see the phenomena of Global South is already leading some of the denomination and some of the largest networks of Christianity. It is in this context that we need to understand. John Stott said that we must be a global Christian with a global vision because our God is a global God. And so what does it mean with the face of Christianity, church being in every nation of the world? We are living in some historic moments in the story of Christianity. And now there is a church in every country. And so we must understand the global nature of our faith and how that is fundamentally transforming the faith itself. But sometimes Christianity is perceived as a Western religion. But that's not so. I say Christianity is Asian. And I'm here in Asia and talking about this as an Asian religion, not as an East Asian, not as a South Asian, not as a Southeast Asian. He was a West Asian, a Palestinian Jew. Jesus, we sometimes paint him with blue eyes and blonde hair. That does not make Jesus an American or European. And we must understand that Christianity began in Asia and they continue to thrive here, uninterrupted, continual presence of Christians here in Asia. And also in Africa. Africa is some of the largest Christian continent now, because Jesus as a baby was taken to Africa as well. And it's only sometimes how we teach the Christian story. We read the Bible and then jump all the way to the 16th century Reformation. And, we start with Martin Luther and Calvin, especially among the Protestant circles. And as if nothing really mattered, 2nd century to 16th century. And so how we teach and literature that we cover and how we skip over continents and centuries is important, and it cannot be ignored anymore. We need to relook at Christianity in its entirety. All 2,000 years of story on all continents of the world and how it is reshaping at the beginning of the 21st century. So, in my Chicago, in my class, I say Christianity is not native to America. Jesus did not grow up in Chicago and take his disciples on Lake Michigan. And Jesus' headquarters was Capernaum. And he was born in Bethlehem. He was a Nazarene from the town of Jesus of Nazareth. And Sea of Galilee is where he draw his disciples and taught them. And many of the gospel accounts is the Sea of Galilee is not Lake Michigan. And so sometimes we have this understanding, painting, literature, songs, portrayal of Jesus as a Western man. And I think that needs to be corrected. Nearly 2/3 of immigrants are Christian. And that's an important. And where Christianity grows, it'll push its people out. So it is a Protestant Reformation. A century after that, Europeans become mobile. Europeans started traveling everywhere. Some 50 million Europeans went all over the world and made the Christianity look European. And so that story is important. Now, Africans, Asians, and Latinos are traveling. And they are making Christianity look black, brown, and yellow. And, once again, it is getting a facelift. And to understand Christianity is changing how it appears around the world. Bishop N.T. Wright said about the division of churches along national, linguistic, racial, ethnic, and cultural lines have effectively blunted the witness of the church in the world. We have created German church, Anglican church, French church, Dutch and Swedish church, American churches. And so along the ethnic lines, white church, black church, and racial lines and language lines. And it has divided Christianity, especially the Protestant evangelical and Pentecostal circles. It is important, as N.T. Wright reminds us, a globalized Christian witness is more powerful than the divided and the sum total of all the division among us. And it's important for us to understand the globalizing nature. And the force that is globalizing Christianity is migration. And is what I call as globalizing of the Western church. The Stephen Warner is a sociologist based in Chicago. He made this famous statement: immigrants are not de-Christianizing American society, but are de-Europeanizing American Christianity. And I would argue immigrants are globalizing American Christianity. When Christianity was thriving in Europe, migration happened from Europe. Now that Africa and Latin America and Asia, where Christianity is growing, they are sending missionaries to America. And so it's truly getting globalized in America. So is it British Christianity. British Christianity is diasporic at its core. Jesus did not grow up there and walk around in London or, Bristol or in Liverpool. And to understand that Christianity was brought to the British Isles. And so understanding the story of how migration and missionary effort have happened throughout the history of the church in Britain as well. So diaspora has globalized Christianity everywhere. We are all migrants or descendants of migrants. And Christianity was brought to us by migrants or some missionary efforts from other parts of the world. And so we need to be discipled to become world Christian. Not worldly Christian, but truly have the global consciousness and relationship and friendship with people from around the world. And migrants helps us to do that. And so more globally aware and more globally connected we are, more globally relevant and needed we will be. And so mission happens out of the context of network of relationship and understanding and sense of mutuality and appreciation of culture. Because we need to understand there is Christians in every country of the world. And that's why the story of heterogeneity comes in. In the last 60 years or so, there was a mission concept called HUP, Homogeneity Unit Principle. And now we redefined it and we call it Heterogeneity Unity Paradigm. But it's a major paradigm shift in our understanding. Does your church or your institution or your mission agency's leadership look something like that? Where there's a great diversity, drawn people from many different corners of the world. And how do you establish unity that is beyond the commonality of your race, your language, and your culture or your denomination? And so this is an efficient movement, as Andrew Walls would say, in the history of the church. The diaspora factor is creating this global, polycentric, polyphonic sensibility. And it amplifying Christian diversity within Christianity and is profoundly transforming the global church and her global engagement with the rest of the world in the coming decades. So I say Christianity is diasporic. Diaspora is the mega theme of the Bible. How margins and centers, new margins are created and new centers are created and how it continually expands and grows. And so this is two principles that Andrew Walls' foundational teaching talks about. Indigenizing principle, which makes Christian faith infinitely translatable. And then the pilgrim principle makes it inevitably transportable. And Christian mission concurrently universalizes its particularity and particularizes its universality. It enters into the world. An incarnational faith, particular time and history and place and culture and family and people that Jesus was born into. And he tells his disciple to go to the ends of the earth. And so this universality and particularity collides in Christian mission and understanding of that. In contrast to Christianity, we often look at other faiths. I want to look at two faiths here in particular. Crossing of Kalapani. In Hindu scriptures, there is clear prohibition in crossing waters. It'll pollute you. Hinduism is a landlocked civilization, and every time you cross waters, you are supposed to go through rituals and cleansing rituals because you have been defiled. You are not supposed to travel anywhere. And that leads to this notion of Punya Bhumi, sacred land, and land of your birth. You're supposed to live and die close to or at the place where you were born. And the gods of the land are territorial. And your Janma Bhumi, that means your place of your birth, is your Karma Bhumi. And your Dharma Bhumi, your place of your Dharma, your duty. And is also the Moksha Bhumi, a land of your salvation. If salvation is tied to the land and to the land of your birth, why would you want to migrate anywhere? And so you venerate your land. And so the notion of pilgrimage, the holy waters, all of that is tied to the land. And you will never want to migrate anywhere else because your future is at stake. The future generation will never want to go because when the old man dies, you're supposed to light the funeral pyre. So generations were bound together to each other and to the land, and they will never supposed to go anywhere else. And secondly, we want to look at the Islamic worldview. It is also a rooted religion. There has an unmovable geographical center. You're supposed to pray turning towards the city of Mecca. You're supposed to do pilgrimage to the city of Mecca, Hajj and Salat. And then scripture can never be translated because God only speaks Arabic. And there's a sacred language, culture, and people. And so it's in this context, Lamin Sana, the Gambian Islamic convert, he talks about Muslim hijrah bequeathed the legacy of geographical and linguistic orthodoxy. While the Christian Pentecost created the reverse, an abandonment of the idea of divine territoriality. And so it is Christianity has no geographical, cultural, or physical center. And the center of our faith is Jesus Christ. He rose again. Yeah, he was buried, but he conquered sin and death and he lives again. And so he's not buried in a tomb that we need to venerate, that we need to do pilgrimages. And that is not the tenets of our faith. Because we worship a living God. And by his Spirit, he's moving all over the world. And so that is contrast to Islam and Hinduism. We see Christianity is a moving faith. It is meant to go places. It will go from place to place to place. The shifting of the center of gravity is inevitable. So different people are the chief representatives of this faith. It'll never remain with one group of people or one race or one nationality. It is a transportable and a translatable faith. Christianity cannot be held captive to any geographical location or domesticated by any people and they kept it for themselves, because its very nature is to break free from the prisons that we enshrine it in. It is the most missionary faith of all the faiths because of the innate nature and the capacity and the power to break across language and culture and the barriers of nationality, and is meant to go places. So Christianity is a mobile faith, and contrary to all other faiths, and it is meant to go places, and understanding the center of faith is a Jesus who rose again from the grave, and we don't venerate any tomb anymore. It is in this context that I want to quickly, Presbyterian chaplain to the U.S. Senate, he said, Christianity in the beginning was a fellowship of men and women centered around the living Christ. Then Christianity moved to Greece, it became a philosophy. Then it moved to Rome, it became an institution. Then it moved to Europe, and it became a culture. It came to England, it became imperial. It went to America, Christianity went to America, and it became a big business. And a big business at that. And many, many business ideas have infiltrated into how we do missions today. And it's important for us to understand, whenever Christianity enters a culture, it also takes something from the culture. So from the Greek, it was a world of philosophy. When it went to German, it was about doctrine and dogmatic theology. And so every culture has gained. And in America, we have bought in many things from Hollywood and managerial and the business acumen and the consumerism. All of that has infiltrated into how we do mission and understanding of mission. And let's pause and go back to one Bible verse and to understanding the modern missionary movement. One of the foundational texts was this verse in Matthew 28, verses 9 and 20, and what is often called the Great Commission. Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. I want to revisit this foundational text and understand in the context of Great Commission. Couple of objections as we begin. First, Great Commission is not in the Bible. It is not an original biblical text. It is often called as a paratext. Paratexts are these section titles and the chapter titles of the word. All these are recent addition. It was not there in the original text. So paratexts are not original biblical text, and they're not the inspired word of God. Most international languages and the Bible, these things does not translate well. And then secondly, the Great Commission term was first used by a Dutch pastor in the 17th century. It comes from the context of colonialism, and accompanied by notion of empires, slaves and treaties, hierarchies, might and injustice, civilizing agenda and profit motives, territorial expansion and cultural superiority, exploitation of natural resources and subjugation of people and domineering structures. It is often mistaken as a Euro-American concept from the West to the rest. It is not duplicatable, sustainable, or applicable in many, many parts of the world anymore. Secondly, go is not a verb and not a directional word either. In English, when we say go, it means from here to there. Displacement. So it is not so in Greek, the original text of the Matthew 28. The word go simply means it can be from here to there, or from there to here, or even there to there. Many Asian and African languages do not have directional connotations. Because when movement happens from there to here, English language is so sophisticated, we have another word, namely come. Come is nothing but go from another place. Come is also a mission word, and we look at that as we go. So it is not a directional. There's no sense of direction in the original word that is translated go. But in English, it became a very forceful two-letter word and we have built a colonial enterprise, and American business acumen have created a missionary enterprise in the last few decades out of this word. And so understanding mission comes from the Latin word missio, and that's largely used in the Trinitarian theological context of sending of the Son and the Spirit. And so the modern usage can be traced back to Ignatius of Loyola, the Jesuits. And that happened in 16th century. And modern missionary movement, 1792. William Carey landed in India. And so that's 18th century. The subdiscipline of missiology only began in the 20th century. But let's not forget, Christianity is much older than that. And to understand that mission of Christianity has existed way before we put these terms called Great Commission in the Bible. So how do we understand this go, which was last 240 years or so, and now in the last 60 years, there's a lot of emphasis on send. As the Father sent me and I send you, Matthew, John 20. And so how we move to the go and send paradigm. Both of them are directional word, and has always come from one place to the other place, which is from here to there. And how do we include from there to here? That's the other word about to come and receive paradigm of mission. There are many texts in the Bible and mission texts in the book of Acts that talks about come. And for example, Cornelius sends for Peter. Say, please bring Peter. And then we see the Paul travels over from Asia Minor, crosses over to Europe from the city of Troas. And he sees a dream and it says, come and help us. Macedonian call, Acts chapter 16. So come is also a mission word. Come happens at an invitation. And there's no power or resource or exploitation to happen at an invitation. There's a trust created and there's a need expressed, and you work in collaboration and with the one who is calling you for your help. You don't just show up there. William Carey, when he landed, he had no travel documents. He was an illegal immigrant to India. British themselves did not want him. And he had to go and find a refuge. He was a refugee in a Danish colony. And so we see the modern missionary enterprise, the border crossing happen illegally. And how do we understand those who are coming across our borders today? And what documentation and what travel permits do they carry? And we need to recognize there may be William Careys among us who are, who across the border illegally and living among us. And so how do we understand missions? And when borders are crossing the go and come paradigm, and it crosses our imaginations. A strong, powerful, resourceful center is where the go and send comes. But when we don't have resources, and how mission happens from the margin to the center very differently. So let me geographically explain this. A well-resourced center, go happens. And then we talk about this paradigm called scatter paradigm. A well-resourced center, but now going happens in multiple direction, in multiple places. And the come paradigm is no resources, but they show up at a resourceful center and do mission very differently. And the corresponding paradigm for scatter is gather. The word for scatter is diaspora, the scattering. And the word for gather is ecclesia. God gathers the scattered ones, and then scatters the gathered one. And so the diaspora and ecclesia are two paradigms that we need to understand how the movement of people from around the world. And when I map this over the whole world, and we see these multiple centers, how they react, there is both come and go from multiple places. And so we need to understand my going is a coming for somebody else. And somebody else is also going from some other place, and they're coming to live near us. And I need them as much as they need me. And it's together we understand this faith. And there are 10 major characteristics I often say about the 21st century Christianity. And they are often these words. Polycentric, multiple centers. Omnidirectional, it is flowing in all directions. And it's polyphonal, multiple languages, the hypermobile world that we are entering into, and a connected world that we are becoming. And I won't have time to go into the other themes. It is important to understand some of this growing reality of go and come from multiple locations in the world. In light of that, I felt it is time to retranslate Matthew 28:19. And this is how I retranslate. As you move about, that is a more accurate translation than go, make disciples. And then disciple all people everywhere. Disciple is the verb, not make disciple. And I can unpack that later. But I want to kind of make an attempt in retranslating the Great Commission text and understand for the global context of today. In light of that, we come to the theme of God on the move, or Motus Day. And, some people in the theological circle, we still love these Latin terminologies. And I just want to go back to a simple description of God on the move. I think it was Martin Luther who talked about Latin captivity. And we still have a lot of those Latin captivity in theological circles. And so go back to simple descriptive word called God on the move. My first quote comes from John Stott. In his commentary on the book of Acts, when he was describing and summarizing the Stephen's message, after which he was martyred, the first martyr of the church. And this is how he summarized his great sermon that captures the entire history of Israel. And this is what John Stott says. God of the Old Testament was a living God, a God on the move and on the march. He was always calling his people out for fresh adventures and always accompanying and directing them as they went. So we worship a living and moving God. God is not static, stoic, or stagnant, stuck to a place. And then we make God as an idol. We try to make God after our own kind. God made us after His kind. Now we try to make God after our own kind, for our own ulterior purposes. So we are revisiting the doctrine of God, doctrine of Trinity, creation, doctrine of humanity and fall, and to reframing it using motile language. And, Descartes said that I think, therefore I am. And I say, I move, therefore I am. And to understanding mobility and motion is essential of who we are as human beings. We are created to move. And it's moving to save is how I talk about salvation. God coming to us. Emmanuel God, and to understanding of incarnation and salvation using motile language. So human movability is as characteristic feature since we are created in the likeness of God. Similar to the notion of human rationality, relationality, dignity, identity, solidarity, freedom, worth, and other dominant interpretation of the image of God in the classical theological text. And I compare this notion of moving God in contrast to idols who are static, who are gods and goddesses who have boundaries. I come from the land of idolatry. And so in India and Hinduism, we need to understand the idols have a boundary of their own. When you go from one place to another place, this God cannot do any good or even evil there. He has boundaries of his influence. And so are demons and guardian spirits and tribal deities in Africa and Asia and other parts of the world. And so these are idolatrous societies and have always become insular, inward-looking, and because the boundaries of the habitation of their gods. And so remember Jeremiah chapter 10, he talks about how the need to be carried. Your gods have feet, but they cannot walk. They have eyes that they cannot hear. They have ears they cannot hear. And the eyes that they cannot see. And he was mocking the idols of his time. And then he says that our God is a universal, is a living God, in contrast to that. And so Psalm 115 again says, make devotees immobile and lifeless. And worshipping, we become whom we worship. And when you begin to bow down before idols, you will also become lifeless, motionless, emotionless. In other words, dead. And so we see idols as static gods. Remember the passage in Isaiah chapter 40. He says about an idol, a craftsman casts it, a goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts it with silver chains. He who is improvised for an offering chooses wood that will not rot, and he seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. Idolatry is just about worshipping physical objects, but it's also about placing ultimate trust and reliance and anything that robs us, God, of His glory, like wealth, power, and human relationship. Seeking created goods in our own image and rejecting true God and a misdirected worship. and how it's closely linked to immorality, greed, and pride. And so John Calvin talks about human heart is an idol factory, and we will make idols because we don't want to recognize and acknowledge the sovereignty of a living God. And so we want to talk about this moving God and to reframe an understanding of a moving God, a missionary God in a doctrine of Trinity. And remember, in the very beginning, Hebrew 1:1, we see the plural noun. And we see God is in motion in the very beginning in Genesis 1:2. And the communality, the relationship between the triune God. God moves within God's self. And that motion is what leads God outward to the world and to understand to missionary nature of God's activity and God's engagement with the world. Both monotheism, worshipping one God, or tritheism, having three gods, makes God motionless, while polytheism makes God territorial. If gods have territory, we need to have many, many gods and goddesses for all the territories of the world. And so it is in India, land of idolatry. You travel few dozens of miles, we have another set of idols. And because we need to create idols for every region of the country. And so that's why the African theologian talked about the dance of perichoresis, the Trinitarian interaction as a dance. I mean, how can you imagine dance without motion? And so we go back to the Trinitarian theology to understand the Motus Dei, moving God, and to missionary God of the Christian faith. And so Miroslav Volf is another theologian that I've drawn from. And he talks about polycentric, symmetrical reciprocity of the many. And so that's what makes Christianity exceptionally a missionary faith. And then finally, ecclesiology, understanding moving nature of God. The conception of sending is limiting, problematic, and unsuitable for a global polycentric Christianity of the 21st century. The concept of sending emerges from a strong, powerful, resourceful center going to the periphery. It is linear, one-directional, unilateral, intended to reproduce culture, dogma, structures of the powerful center in other locales. It came out of the context of colonialism, magisterial commissioning with civilizing agenda and profit motives. And to understand this post-COVID unbundling of the church, we are not bound to a place anymore, or time, or rituals. We have become liberated. And what does it mean to be phygital, virtual reality, and the new world of scattered gathering and gathered scattering. I call it as two DNA strands of diasporic ecclesia. And like DNA strands that the biologists will talk about, scattering and gathering. And scattered gathering and gathered scattering is how we need to understand church in a moving world. And then a little bit of scattered church and the gathered church. And we see various aspects, liberating an understanding of a church in a truly global reality, and what does it mean. And we can go more into it as we can discuss, but for lack of time, I want to wrap up our conversation. So we're talking about migration and how it is fundamentally changing Christianity around the world. And it calls us to reimagine mission from everywhere to the everywhere, and visiting some other foundational text and understanding it in the context of polycentric, omnidirectional, hyper-connected global world. People are on the move, and moving people transform Christianity and creates new momentum for the spread of Christianity around the world. Our God is on the move. And Motus Dei is a new framework of doing theology and missiology for the 21st century. A few resources, and we just released a book called Asians in Diaspora just last month. And we also had a book called Africans in Diaspora. And there's a new book called Sharing Jesus with Hindus. And I've also done a 3-volume series on Asian diaspora, Christianity, and a few other books on refugees and Indian diaspora. And hope that will be helpful. Thank you again for having me, and I look forward to your discussion and questions on the concept of Motus Dei and how we need to reframe our theology and missiology for a fast-moving, changing world of the 21st century. God bless you all.